There was a path, he told Xerxes, a narrow mountain trail that wound around the cliffs and emerged behind the Greek position. For a bag of Persian gold, Ephialtes was willing to guide them through it. Xerxes immediately dispatched his elite immortals under the command of Hydarnes to execute a nighttime flanking maneuver. Here's where the story reveals the true character of Leonidas. By dawn of the third day, he knew exactly what was happening. Greek scouts came running with news that Persian forces had been spotted on the mountain path above them. The trap was closing. In a few hours, the Spartans would be surrounded, attacked from both front and rear. Any rational military commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. The mission to delay the Persians had succeeded. The Greek naval forces had bought precious time, and most of the allied Greek forces could be saved to fight another day. But Leonidas made a different choice. He ordered most of his allies to withdraw immediately, saving nearly 6,000 Greek lives. But he and his 300 Spartans would stay, along with 700 brave volunteers from Thespiae and 400 from Thebes. They would make their final stand. Why? Because Leonidas understood something that transcends military strategy. Sometimes a defeat can be more powerful than a victory. Sometimes a sacrifice can inspire more courage than any triumph. He was about to teach the world that some things are worth dying for. The final battle was poetry written in blood and bronze. Surrounded on all sides, the Spartans retreated to a small hill within the pass. There, back to back, they fought like cornered lions. When their spears broke, they fought with swords. When their swords shattered, they fought with daggers. When they had no weapons left, they fought with their bare hands and teeth. Leonidas fell early in the final assault, struck down by Persian arrows and spears. But his men fought on, their shields forming a protective circle around their king's body, determined that the Persians would never desecrate it. They held that circle until the very last man fell. When the sun set on the third day, not a single one of the 300 was left alive. But the price they extracted was staggering. Ancient sources suggest the Persians lost over 20,000 men taking Thermopylae, 20,000 of the world's best soldiers, killed by 300 Greeks who refused to retreat. But here's the shocking truth about Thermopylae that most people never learn. The Spartans won. Not militarily. Of course, they died to the last man. But strategically, politically, and spiritually, their sacrifice achieved something that no military victory could have accomplished. First, they bought time. Those 3 days allowed the Greek fleet to position itself at Salamis, allowed Athens to evacuate its civilians, and allowed the other Greek city-states to prepare for the coming storm. Without Thermopylae, the Persians would have swept through Greece in weeks instead of months. Second, they proved that Persians could bleed. For decades, the Persian Empire had seemed invincible, a force of nature that could not be stopped. But at Thermopylae, a handful of Greeks had made them pay a terrible price for every step forward. The aura of Persian invincibility was shattered forever, but most importantly, they created a legend that unified Greece like nothing ever had before. The story of the 300 spread like wildfire across the Greek world. In Athens, in Corinth, in every city-state, people told the tale of the Spartan king who chose death over dishonor, who stood fast when the whole world was against him. When the Persian fleet was crushed at Salamis a few months later, Greek sailors fought with the fury of men who remembered Thermopylae. When the Persian army was finally destroyed at Plataea the following year, Greek warriors charged into battle crying the names of the 300. Leonidas and his men had become more powerful in death than they ever were in life. The inscription placed at Thermopylae says it all. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. These weren't words of defeat. They were words of triumph. The Spartans had kept faith with their code, their laws, their way of life, even unto death. Xerxes, meanwhile, returned to Persia a broken man. His mighty fleet was at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. His invincible army was scattered to the winds, and his dreams of conquering Europe were in ruins. The man who had whipped the sea itself had been humbled by 300 Greeks who refused to bend the knee. But the real shock, the truth that makes this story so powerful even today, is what those 300 Spartans actually died for. They didn't die for king or country. They died for an idea. The idea that there are things worth dying for. The idea that freedom isn't free. The idea that sometimes when the darkness seems overwhelming, it only takes a few good people willing to stand and say no further. This is why the story of Thermopylae is echoed through history for over 2 millennia. This is why it inspired the resistance fighters of World War II, why it motivated the founders of democratic nations, why it still moves us today. Because at its heart, it's not really a story about ancient Greeks and Persians. It's a story about us. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice for the things we believe in. The 300 Spartans taught the world that numerical superiority means nothing when facing moral superiority. They proved that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. They showed us that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you know you can't win. Think about that for a moment. In a world where we're constantly told to pick our battles, to be practical, to compromise, the Spartans chose a battle they knew they would lose because it was the right battle to fight. They looked at impossible odds and said, "This is where we make our stand." Today, as we face our own challenges, our own moments when we must choose between the easy path and the right path, the 300 still have something to teach us. They remind us that heroes aren't people without fear. They're people who act despite their fear. They show us that sometimes the smallest group of determined individuals can change the course of history. The next time you face a moment when you must choose between what's easy and what's right, remember Thermopylae. Remember that 300 ordinary men became immortal because they refused to compromise their principles. Remember that their sacrifice didn't just save Greece, it saved the very idea of human freedom. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that courage still matters in our world, then do something the ancient Greeks would appreciate. Share it. Hit that like button to honor the memory of the 300. Leave a comment and tell us what Thermopylae means to you. And subscribe to History in Motion. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are and who we can choose to become. The 300 Spartans gave their lives so that freedom could survive. The least we can do is make sure their story survives too. Until next time, keep history in motion and remember, some things are worth fighting for, some things are worth dying for, and some things are worth remembering forever. Picture this. It's a scorching hot morning in 480 BC. 300 warriors stand shoulder to shoulder, their bronze shields gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. Behind them, just 7,000 allies. In front of them, the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever seen. 150,000 Persian soldiers stretching to the horizon like a human tsunami. The math doesn't add up, does it? How could 300 men possibly stand against an empire that spanned 3 continents? But here's the shocking truth that Hollywood never told you. The Persian Empire, the mightiest superpower of its time, was about to learn a lesson that would echo through history for over 2,000 years. A lesson about courage, sacrifice, and the price of freedom. This is the real story of Thermopylae, and it's far more incredible than any movie could ever portray. To understand what happened at that narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, we need to go back 10 years earlier to 490 BC. The Persian Empire under Darius I had just suffered the most humiliating defeat of their imperial history at a place called Marathon. A small Greek force had done the impossible. They'd beaten the Persians on their own terms and sent them running back across the Aegean Sea with their tails between their legs. But empires don't forget humiliation. When Darius died, his son Xerxes inherited more than just a throne. He inherited a burning desire for revenge. Xerxes wasn't just any king. He was a self-proclaimed king of kings, ruler of an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia, from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. This was a man who had mountains leveled because they blocked his path, who built bridges across entire seas because water dared to separate his armies. For 4 years, Xerxes prepared for total war. He assembled the most massive military force the ancient world had ever witnessed. Persian immortals with their golden spears, Assyrian archers whose arrows could blot out the sun, Indian war elephants that shook the earth with every step, Egyptian marines who had conquered the Nile, Scythian cavalry from the steppes of Central Asia. This wasn't just an army. It was a combined might of dozens of nations, all marching under one banner, all headed for one destination, Greece. The logistics alone were staggering. Xerxes ordered the construction of 2 massive pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, each one nearly a mile long. When storms destroyed the first bridges, Legend says Xerxes was so furious, he ordered his soldiers to whip the sea itself as punishment. This was a man who would not be denied. While Xerxes was assembling his world-conquering force, Greece was facing its darkest hour. The Greek city-states were famously independent, constantly fighting among themselves, trusting no one. But the Persian threat changed everything. For the first time in their history, Greeks from Athens to Corinth, from Thebes to Sparta, began to speak a unity. The Hellenic League was born, and they had a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane, depending on how you looked at it. They would use Greece's mountainous terrain and narrow passages to neutralize the Persian numerical advantage. Instead of meeting Xerxes on open ground where his massive army could spread out and overwhelm them, they would force him to fight in places where numbers meant nothing. Thermopylae was perfect. The name literally means hot gates because of the natural hot springs in the area. It was a narrow coastal pass, barely wide enough for a single chariot, squeezed between steep cliffs and the sea. Any army trying to march south into Greece would have to pass through this bottleneck. It was David's slingshot made of stone and geography. But here's where the story gets complicated, and where the real Spartans prove they were even more remarkable than their Hollywood counterparts. When the Greek council met to decide who would defend Thermopylae, there was only one choice that made sense: Sparta. These weren't just warriors. They were the ultimate warriors, men who had been training for war since they were 7 years old. But Sparta had a problem. The Carnea, their most sacred religious festival, was in progress. Spartan law absolutely forbade warfare during religious celebrations. The complete Spartan army of nearly 8,000 men couldn't march until the festival ended. By then, it would be too late. So King Leonidas made a decision that would define him for eternity. He would take his personal bodyguard, 300 men, all chosen specifically because they had sons to carry on their bloodlines. This was a suicide mission. This was a calculated sacrifice. Leonidas knew exactly what he was walking into. When Xerxes first laid eyes on the Greek position at Thermopylae, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. According to Herodotus, Persian scouts reported that the Spartans were exercising and combing their hair. Xerxes was baffled. These men were about to face the might of the Persian Empire, and they were grooming themselves like they were going to party. What Xerxes didn't understand was that he was witnessing a Spartan ritual. Before battle, Spartans always prepared their bodies as offerings to the gods. They weren't being vain. They were preparing to die beautifully. Xerxes, ever confident, sent a herald with a simple message: surrender your weapons. Leonidas' response became legendary: come and take them. These 4 words, Molenlave, in ancient Greek, became the battle cry that echoed across centuries. For the first 2 days, the Persian assault was relentless but futile. Wave after wave of Persian infantry crashed against the Spartan phalanx like ocean waves against granite cliffs. The Spartan formation was perfect, each man's shield protecting the warrior to his left, their long spears creating an impenetrable wall of bronze and iron. Xerxes threw everything he had at them: regular Persian infantry, elite immortals, Median and Scythian forces, even his feared sacred band. Nothing worked. The narrow pass meant the Persians couldn't use their overwhelming numbers, and in single combat, no one in the ancient world could match a Spartan warrior. The scene was almost surreal. Persian arrows flew so thick they literally blocked out the sun, just as the Greeks had been warned. But instead of cowering, one Spartan warrior, Dionysus, famously quipped, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." Even facing certain death, the Spartans never lost their dark sense of humor. But Xerxes had one advantage the Greeks hadn't counted on: Greek treachery. His name was Ephialtes, and he was about to commit one of history's most infamous acts of betrayal. Ephialtes was a local Greek, a man who knew every goat path and mountain trail in the region. When he approached the Persian camp on the second night, he carried information that would doom the Greek defenders.